Quentin Carter sat in his office, staring at a pile of customer complaints stacked on his desk. He had built this restaurant chain from the ground up after buying it from a struggling owner nearly a decade ago. 13 locations across the state, each meant to serve great food with warm hospitality. But lately, something felt off. The complaints weren't about the food. It was the service. People being ignored, treated rudely, or outright refused. And it wasn't just one location, it kept happening at the same restaurant. Quentin ran a hand through his graying hair. He'd always prided himself on keeping a close eye on his business, but this location was slipping through the cracks. The reports from the manager, a guy named Derek, always painted a different picture. "Everything's great," Derek had said last time. "Just a couple of entitled customers making noise." Quentin didn't believe that. He had never personally met most of the staff at this location. His business had grown too large for him to know every employee, and most of them only knew him as a name on their paychecks. He rarely visited this particular restaurant, trusting his district manager to handle things. But now, he needed to see the truth for himself. The next morning, Quentin dressed carefully. He pulled on an old hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers. He let his beard grow out for a few days to look unkempt. A worn-out baseball cap finished the look. He barely recognized himself in the mirror. Perfect. He drove himself to the restaurant, parking his car a few blocks away. The place was busy, filled with the hum of conversation and the clatter of silverware. He stepped inside, the scent of coffee and sizzling bacon filling the air. A young waitress passed by without a glance. Another stood behind the register, chatting with a coworker while ignoring a couple waiting to pay. Quentin took a seat at a booth near the back, watching. Several minutes passed. No one came to take his order. He glanced around. Other customers were being served, but he remained invisible. A waitress in her mid-20s with blonde hair tied in a high ponytail walked by with a tray. He raised a hand slightly. She barely looked at him. "Excuse me," Quentin said, keeping his voice polite. "Could I get a menu?" She sighed, turning fully toward him. "We're really busy," she said flatly. "You can wait." Quentin blinked. The restaurant wasn't at full capacity, and she had just taken an order from a well-dressed man at the counter. He decided to wait, giving her a chance to return. 5 more minutes passed. Then 10. Quentin watched as she continued to serve other tables, deliberately skipping his. He noticed her glance his way once or twice, making a face before turning away. He stood and approached the counter. "Ma'am, I'd really like to order something." She turned with an exaggerated sigh. Her name tag read Jessica. "Look," she said, folding her arms. "We kinda have a policy about loitering. If you're not planning to order, I can't just let you sit here." Quentin's jaw tightened. "I am trying to order," Jessica scoffed. "Right. And what are you even gonna get? A cup of coffee and sit here all day?" Before he could respond, another voice cut in. "Jess, what's the problem?" A man in his 40s, with slicked back hair and a manager's badge, approached. "Derek." Jessica rolled her eyes. "He's just sitting here, probably waiting for someone else to pay for him." Derek barely glanced at Quentin before nodding. "Yeah, buddy, we don't do handouts." Quentin felt a slow burn in his chest. "I never asked for a handout," he said, voice calm but firm. "I just wanted to order breakfast." Derek gave him a condescending smile. "We have a certain standard here, you know? Can't just let anyone take up space." Quentin stared at him. The audacity. The complete lack of shame. He had come expecting to see some flaws in the customer service, but this? This was worse than he imagined. Jessica smirked and turned away, already moving on to another table. Quentin took a slow breath. He had seen enough. It was time to show them exactly who they were talking to. Quentin didn't react immediately. He let the moment stretch, watching Derek's self-satisfied posture and Jessica's complete disregard for the situation. There was no hesitation in their behavior. This wasn't an exception. This was routine. He turned away without a word, walking toward the exit. His mind worked quickly. Revealing himself right then would have been satisfying, but it wouldn't give him the full picture. He needed to see more. Outside, he stepped around the corner and pulled out his phone. A few taps and he had the restaurant's business line ringing. It took 5 rings before someone picked up. Yeah? A distracted male voice answered. Quentin kept his tone neutral. I was just in your restaurant trying to get a meal, but I was ignored. When I asked for service, I was told you don't do handouts. Is that policy? There was a pause. Who is this? A customer. The line went quiet for a moment before the voice returned, less interested now. Look, man, I don't know what to tell you. We're busy. Quentin's jaw tightened. I was just in there. It wasn't that busy. Then maybe take the hint, the man said before hanging up. Quentin stared at the phone. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. This wasn't just negligence. It was systemic. He pushed open the door again, stepping back inside. Derek was near the register, chatting with another employee. Quentin walked straight to the counter, planting both hands on it. I want to apply for a job. Derek barely glanced at him. We're not hiring. Quentin didn't move. Then why is there a sign in the window saying you are? Derek's expression flickered with annoyance before he sighed. Fine. Fill this out. He grabbed a crumpled application from behind the counter and slid it over. Bring it back later. I have time now. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. Suit yourself? Quentin took a seat at an empty table and started writing. He kept his answers simple, sticking to the basics. He used a different last name, one that wouldn't immediately connect him to the company. Within 10 minutes he was done. When he brought it back, Derek barely glanced at it before tossing it onto the counter. Come in tomorrow morning. We'll see if you can handle a shift. Quentin nodded once and left. The next morning, he arrived early. The uniform they handed him was slightly too small, but he didn't complain. Jessica was there, along with a few other employees he hadn't met yet. Derek barely acknowledged him, gesturing toward the back. Follow Greg. He'll show you what to do. Greg, a stocky man in his early 30s, led him to the kitchen. You're on dish duty. Keep up or you'll hear about it. Quentin nodded and got to work. He didn't mind the job itself. He had started in kitchens before he ever owned a business. The rhythm of washing, rinsing, and stacking dishes was familiar. He worked quietly, taking in everything around him. Greg wasn't bad. He worked efficiently and didn't waste time. But the rest of the kitchen had a tense energy. Conversations were hushed, and the cooks avoided eye contact with Derek whenever he passed through. After an hour, Quentin stepped out to grab a mop from the supply closet. As he walked past the break room, he overheard voices inside. I can't keep doing this, a woman said, frustration barely contained. Just ignore him, another voice replied. He cut my hours again. I asked why, and he said I should be grateful to have a job at all. Quentin slowed his steps. You're not the only one, the second voice said. Jessica gets all the good shifts because of Derek. The rest of us are just here when it's convenient for them. There was a pause. Then a defeated sigh. I need this job. Quentin moved away before they noticed him. By midday, he had seen enough. The kitchen staff worked under constant pressure, the wait staff played favorites with customers, and Derek controlled everything with a mix of manipulation and intimidation. Jessica, clearly favored, acted with impunity. Quentin finished his shift without revealing himself. He wanted one more test. After changing back into his regular clothes, he left and returned an hour later in the same worn-down outfit from before. He walked straight to the counter and waited. Jessica saw him and immediately frowned. She turned to another waitress and murmured something. The girl glanced at him, then hesitated before shaking her head. Jessica sighed dramatically and walked over. You again? Quentin met her gaze. I'd like to order a meal. She crossed her arms. We don't have space. He glanced around. Multiple empty tables. Looks like you do. She scoffed. Look, I'm not doing this again. You need to leave. Before he could respond, Derek appeared. I thought we made it clear, buddy. This isn't a place to hang out if you can't afford to be here. Quentin let the silence stretch. Then, finally, he straightened, pulling off the baseball cap. Derek's smug expression faltered. Quentin's voice was calm but firm. I own this restaurant. Jessica's face drained of color. Derek opened his mouth, then shut it again. Quentin let his words sink in. The entire room had gone quiet. Employees in the back hesitated in their tasks, stealing glances. You've got 5 minutes, Quentin said, locking eyes with Derek. To explain yourself? Derek's face had shifted from arrogant amusement to stunned disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Around them, the restaurant had gone eerily silent. Employees who had previously ignored Quentin were now frozen in place, watching the unfolding scene. Jessica stepped back instinctively, glancing toward Derek as if waiting for him to fix the situation. But Derek wasn't moving. His confidence had drained from his posture, shoulders stiffening as realization set in. Quentin kept his stance firm, his expression unreadable. You said you don't do handouts, he said, his voice even. You said this place has a certain standard. I'd love to hear more about that. Derek's throat bobbed. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. Quentin didn't let him continue. I sat at that booth for 15 minutes while your staff ignored me. I asked for a menu and was told to wait. When I followed up, I was dismissed. Then I was accused of loitering. He let the words settle. So tell me, Derek, where exactly is the misunderstanding? Derek wiped a hand over his mouth, his usual slick demeanor cracking. I didn't know it was you. Quentin's gaze didn't waver. Would it have mattered? Jessica, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke. I thought. She stopped herself, then tried again. I wasn't trying to be rude. Quentin turned his attention to her. You just assumed I wasn't worth serving. Jessica's lips parted, but no excuse came. A young waitress standing near the register shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't involved earlier, but now she looked uneasy, as if she had witnessed this behavior before. Quentin exhaled slowly, glancing around the restaurant. Customers were pretending not to eavesdrop, but their eyes darted toward him every few seconds. Employees stood rigid, some looking guilty, others simply waiting for what would happen next. His gaze returned to Derek. How long has this been going on? Derek straightened slightly, trying to regain some composure. We run things efficiently here. We don't have time for people who just want to take up space without spending money. Quentin's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. This isn't efficiency. This is discrimination. You judged a customer based on appearance instead of treating them with respect. Derek shook his head quickly. It's not like that. We have to be careful. Sometimes people come in just to sit around without buying anything. We can't afford to let that happen. Quentin's stare didn't waver. So you assume? Without even asking? Without even offering the basic courtesy of service? Derek hesitated. I didn't mean anything by it. Quentin let the silence stretch. Derek had no real defense. He turned toward the employees who had been silently watching. Does this happen often? There was hesitation, then a voice spoke up. Yes. It was the waitress who had looked uncomfortable earlier. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other but didn't back down. It's not the first time customers have been turned away for looking. She searched for the right word. For looking like they might not have money. Jessica's expression hardened. That's not true. The waitress glanced at her, but her voice remained steady. It is. Quentin nodded, absorbing the information. Then he turned back to Derek. Who else has been treated this way? Derek hesitated. I don't keep track of every customer who walks in here. Quentin's voice sharpened. But you had no problem deciding who wasn't worth serving. Derek's lips pressed together, but he had no answer. Quentin turned his attention to Jessica. And you? How many customers have you ignored or dismissed? Jessica bristled. I was just following the environment here. That's how things have always been. Quentin exhaled slowly. That doesn't make it right. Jessica's confidence wavered, but she didn't say anything else. Quentin took a step back, looking at the restaurant as a whole. The weight of what he had uncovered settled deep in his chest. This wasn't just one bad moment. This was a culture that had been allowed to exist under Derek's leadership. He turned back to Derek, his voice calm but final. You're done here. Derek's eyes widened. Wait, Quentin didn't let him continue. Hand over your keys. You're fired. Derek's face went pale. You can't just, I can. Quentin interrupted. And I just did. Derek stood frozen, as if he couldn't quite process what was happening. Jessica's breath hitched slightly. Are you firing me too? Quentin studied her for a moment. You had a choice every time you treated a customer this way. You made the wrong one. Jessica's face paled. You can collect your things and leave, Quentin said. The silence in the restaurant was suffocating. Derek opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. Jessica looked around, as if hoping someone would stand up for her, but no one did. The reality had settled in. Derek finally reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys, setting them on the counter with a clatter. His jaw was tight, but he didn't argue further. He turned sharply, pushing past the employees as he stormed toward the exit. Jessica hesitated longer, but eventually she followed. Quentin exhaled, then turned toward the staff still standing there. Things are going to change. The employees exchanged looks. Some seemed relieved. Others uncertain. Quentin continued. No one gets treated like that in my restaurant. Not customers. Not staff. If you have concerns, you bring them to leadership. If you see something wrong, you speak up. Because this. He gestured toward the door where Derek and Jessica had left. Will not happen again. A few employees nodded. The young waitress who had spoken earlier looked visibly relieved. Quentin turned toward the assistant manager, a woman in her late 40s who had been silently observing the entire time. You'll be in charge for now while I make some changes. She nodded quickly. Understood. Quentin let out a slow breath. He had come here looking for answers. He had found more than he expected. But now, at least, things would be set right. Quentin didn't waste time. He stepped into the office at the back of the restaurant, closing the door behind him. The small, cluttered space reeked of neglect. Food inventory sheets were stacked haphazardly on the desk, and the computer screen was left on, a payroll summary still open. Derek had barely been doing the bare minimum. He sat down and pulled out his phone, calling his district manager. The man answered on the second ring. Quentin got straight to the point. He explained what had happened, detailing the way customers had been treated, the favoritism in scheduling, and the hostile work environment Derek had cultivated. The district manager listened in stunned silence before agreeing to come in later that day to help stabilize things. After hanging up, Quentin took a steady breath. The next step was making sure the employees understood what was coming. He stepped back onto the floor where the staff had gathered, still shaken from what had happened. The assistant manager stood near the counter, keeping a wary eye on everyone. The young waitress who had spoken up earlier had her arms crossed, looking uncertain. The kitchen staff peered out from behind the pass-through window, clearly waiting to see what happened next. Quentin addressed them directly. Things are changing immediately. First, if you've been cut from shifts unfairly, that stops today. I'll be reviewing the schedule personally to make sure everyone gets treated fairly. If you were pushed aside in favor of people Derek preferred, that ends now. Several employees exchanged glances. The assistant manager nodded slightly. Quentin continued. Second, I want to hear from you. If there are problems, now is the time to speak up. Whatever's been happening here under Derek's management, I need to know so I can fix it. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one of the line cooks stepped forward. He wiped his hands on his apron, glancing at the others before speaking. Derek never let us ask for more hours, but Jessica always got whatever shifts she wanted. Some of us have been struggling to pay rent, but he didn't care. If you weren't one of his favorites, he treated you like you didn't exist. Another employee, a busser, nodded in agreement. If customers complained about the service, he'd blame the kitchen or the junior staff. Never himself. He always had an excuse. The assistant manager finally spoke. I tried to push back a few times, but he had the final say. If I disagreed with him too much, he threatened to cut my hours too. Quentin absorbed the information. This wasn't just about bad service, it was a pattern of control, favoritism, and neglect. That stops today, he said firmly. Starting now, I want a culture of respect in this restaurant. For employees, for customers, for everyone who walks through those doors. That means no one gets ignored because of how they look. No one gets mistreated because they don't fit someone's idea of the right kind of customer. And no one gets to run this place like their personal kingdom ever again. A few employees let out quiet breaths, as if they had been holding them in for too long. Quentin turned to the assistant manager. You'll be overseeing things until we find a permanent replacement for Derek. You'll have full support from upper management, and if you see anything that doesn't align with the standards I just set, you bring it to me directly. She straightened her shoulders. Understood. Quentin let his gaze sweep over the group one last time. I'll be back regularly. And not just as the owner. I will be here, working shifts, talking to staff, and making sure this place becomes what it was always meant to be. The employees nodded, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to cautious optimism. The damage Derek had done wouldn't be erased overnight, but this was the first step. Quentin knew that real change took time, but he had no intentions of letting this place fall apart again. He had come undercover to see the truth. Now, he was staying to rebuild it the right way. Quentin stayed late that night, long after the last customer had left. The restaurant was quiet now, the hum of conversations and the clatter of dishes replaced by the low murmur of employees cleaning up. He stood near the counter, observing as the remaining staff moved through their closing duties. The atmosphere had shifted. People were still cautious, but there was a new energy in the air, one that hadn't been there earlier that morning. Without Derek's presence looming over them, there was less tension in the way the employees interacted. Conversations weren't hushed, and no one seemed to be looking over their shoulder. The assistant manager finished checking the register and approached him. Her movements were more assured now, as if the weight she had carried for months had finally been lifted. The schedule needs to be adjusted, she said. I went through it after the shift ended. There were names missing from the rotation entirely. People I know wanted more hours but were pushed aside. Quentin nodded. Fix it. Make sure the shifts are distributed fairly. And if anyone has concerns, I want them brought forward immediately. I'll get it done by tomorrow. As she moved back to her office, the young waitress who had spoken up earlier hesitated near the counter. She seemed unsure whether to approach, her hands tucked into the pockets of her apron. Quentin gave her a nod. Something on your mind? She exhaled, shifting her weight slightly. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I just wanted to thank you for listening. A lot of us thought nothing would ever change. He studied her for a moment. What was it like working under Derek? Her hesitation deepened. It was clear she wasn't used to being asked that kind of question by anyone in charge. But after a moment, she answered. He made it clear who mattered and who didn't. If you weren't in his good graces, your hours got cut, you got the worst sections, and if a customer complained about anything, it was always your fault. Quentin absorbed her words. It lined up with everything else he had seen and heard throughout the day. You spoke up today, he said. That took guts. She gave a small shrug, glancing away. I figured I didn't have much to lose at that point. But I didn't think you'd actually do something about it. That's the problem, isn't it? Quentin said. People get used to bad leadership. They assume nothing will change, so they stop speaking out. That's how people like Derek stay in power for so long. She nodded slightly, as if that truth had been sitting in the back of her mind for a while now. I'm making sure this place runs differently from now on, Quentin said. If you ever see anything like this happening again, I need you to say something. Not just to me, but to whoever is in charge. This only works if people hold each other accountable. She met his gaze then, a flicker of something determined in her eyes. I will. With that, she turned back toward the dining area to finish wiping down the last of the tables. Quentin leaned against the counter, running a hand over his jaw. There was still so much work to do. Firing Derek and Jessica had been necessary, but it was just the start. The damage they had done to the work culture wasn't going to disappear overnight. As he glanced toward the kitchen, he saw Greg, the stocky line cook, stepping out with a garbage bag in hand. Their eyes met briefly. Greg paused, then approached. Got a second? Quentin gestured for him to go ahead. I've been here a while, Greg said. Long enough to see good and bad managers come and go. I just want to say, it's been a long time since someone in charge actually gave a damn about what happens on the ground. Quentin nodded. That's going to change permanently. But I need people like you to help keep it that way. Greg exhaled, adjusting his grip on the garbage bag. You'll have my help. Just don't disappear again. That's how this mess started in the first place. That hit home. Quentin had built this business from nothing, but as it grew, he had distanced himself from the day-to-day operations. He had trusted people like Derek to maintain the standards he had set, and in doing so, he had let the wrong kind of leadership take root. I won't, Quentin said firmly. Not again. Greg gave a nod of approval before heading out the back door. Quentin stayed a while longer, watching as the last few employees finished their tasks and clocked out for the night. The restaurant was empty now, the chairs stacked, the floors mopped. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. He wasn't just going to fix this location. He was going to make sure no other restaurant in his chain ever ended up like this again.